You know, there's old pilots and there's bold pilots, but there's no old, bold pilots.
Okay. Now, another dimension of the Vietnam War that was going on while you were there was the incursion into Cambodia.
Yeah.
We officially did go in and sent substantial numbers of troops in. Did that affect what you did, or what was your connection to that?
Well, yeah, they're going the artillery needs to go. And well, we got 8 inches and 175s, and these are big guns like you'd find on a battleship.
Right.
And these things were actually mounted on track vehicles. The military didn't have any more of them anymore. They use rockets in their places. But they were in the border. Now, at 8 inches, real accurate, but it's not as long. 175 is real long, and we used to joke, you're lucky to get 2 of them in the same grid square. Because the further out you shoot, the more difficult it is to be accurate with them. So yeah, we were moving. We moved some of the 105s, the SP 105s up the border. We brought in some 155s and airlifted them in when we could. But that was during part of the monsoon season, and it was bad. And trying to even navigate those roads is bad. And we had a section between Camp Inari, that was where 4th Infantry Division was. It was between Pleiku and the border. And then there was a couple other Special Forces camps, and the end of that road was Pleiku. And that was an area where they kicked off to go in. And a lot of these Special Forces camps have airstrips and stuff by them left over from the French. And, well, again, like I said, I had a fairly cushy job. The infantry goes first. The artillery's behind them somewhere shooting. It'd be nice if you had a conventional war where you had a front line. Because in Vietnam, there's no front lines. And they pop up anywhere and everywhere, and there's really no front line. And that road was known somewhat to be full of ambushes, and we were covering it. And I'm covering a convoy going, and the weather was bad. I told my crew chief, get a machine gun, and I normally didn't. I was flying 58 at the time, and it can carry 4 people. And I had an aerial observer in the front, and he'd had some stick time. He could get us down in one big chunk, I think, if things required. Crew chief for the back, and he normally had a monkey harness and a short strap that went back, and he clipped into the seat belt so he couldn't fall out. And had a machine gun that hung on a bungee cord from the doorway.
Yep.
Doors were off. And then he asked me if his roommate could go, because I didn't ask anybody else. And he says, you need another gunner. Okay, but I didn't normally fly with anybody else. So he took another gunner, and we were flying ahead of the convoy, trying to deliberately draw fire. Low, slow, stupid, whatever. But the weather was so bad, I couldn't get high anyway. I mean, there were times I couldn't see my own rotor blades. And I'm hugging the treetops. It got so bad for a while, I actually hovered in the convoy. At one point, I heard dust-off call off Pleiku, and they were coming south. And I called them on the radio, and I said, you got wheels on that thing? Because the weather was that bad, you know. And he says, what are you doing? I says, well, I'm covering a convoy, and I'm coming up the other side. So I asked him if he was on his side of the road, because it was kind of a joke. IFR is instrument flight rules. And in Vietnam, we used to say IFR is I follow roads. And in bad weather, we'd get low to the roads and hug the roads. And he was coming down, I was going up. I made sure he was on his side, he made sure I was on my side. Normally in combat we flew with the lights off, even at night. So if you look outside here and you see an aircraft go by and you see the little lights on the outside and you see the rotating beacons, we had them off. We turned them on. And we even turned our marker lights on flash. So the lights that are on the outside of the aircraft are flashing. I got 2 rotating beacons on my aircraft, and they're both going. And in that area, right in the middle, was a plantation. And I don't remember now, it was a rubber or a tea plantation. And on one side is the house, and on one side was manufacturing and whatever. And they ran a power line, because the generator was only on one side of the road, so they ran a power line across. And that's kind of rare in the jungles to find power lines, you know. I mean, Vietnam didn't have a lot of power lines. And so I asked him to call the power line. He said he would. And we had radio contact, and we were on our own sides of the road, and we had all the beacons on and the lights, and we both called the power line at the same time. And we got extra people in the aircraft, so it ain't just me trying to fly and look where I'm going and look to see if I can see him. And we got other people. We didn't see each other. So that's what you get. And that was a day when breakfast to dinner was sea rations,
Mm-hmm.
if I had a chance. Good share of that day, I set the aircraft down, they refueled it running. You hot refueled and right back up and going. And didn't have any time to stay or do anything. Or you got personal business to do, you relieve yourself under the tailboom of the aircraft. You ain't got time to run anyplace else. It was a busy day.
Now, when you were going into Cambodia, was that more dangerous than flying over Vietnam? Or was it basically the same?
You never know. I mean, I'd like to say yes, because the president was stupid enough to tell them we're coming, first off. So they knew what we were going to be doing. But they also then could know we were coming and pull out whatever they want, pull their troops back, go to the jungle and stay put. A lot of times we'd make contact with them and they'd split up into 3-man units and just disappear.
Mm-hmm.
There were times where we thought we had them surrounded, literally surrounded, cordoned off in the jungle. You swear they couldn't go anywhere. And they'd break down into 3-man units and infiltrate right between our lines and be gone, just evaporate. Before I got there, when they went in and fought at Imperial Palace. I can't think the name of the city. The Tet Offensive.
So that was Hue.
At Hue.
Yeah.
They were already prepared and fought in the city, and they retreated all the way to the Imperial Palace. And you'd swear they were there, they can't get out, they can't go anywhere. Next day they were gone. And that's one of the big question marks of the war. How'd they get out of there? Don't know. They had them cornered into the Imperial Palace. Place is surrounded, no place out. Next day they're gone. But the Vietcong, for the most part, everything was planned out in great detail. They didn't do many things off the cuff or rapid reaction forces they didn't have. They planned everything out in great detail, including leaving. And a lot of times things could be quiet for months, and then you could have a battle that lasted 5 minutes, 5 hours, 5 days, and then just as quiet. So you didn't know. I mean, when I first got to Vietnam, we got shelled 3-4 times a week. Sometimes we were probed. Sometimes there were people who actually got on the perimeter. And then I remember after a few months, we went for a month or two and nothing. Absolutely nothing. And we're wondering, what are they saving it all for? What's going to happen? And then we started thinking, how many of our people, because this was a different war and we didn't go over as a solid unit, we didn't go back as a solid unit, people rotated in and rotated out. How many of our people were brand new now? How many of our people hadn't actually been under fire and been tested? How many of them you don't know what they're going to do? And it got kind of a eerie feeling because you didn't know if they were going to have an all-out offensive on you, or if maybe because of Tet, they'd run out of their reserve and they didn't have any fuel in the tank to keep fighting with, or you just didn't know. And you're sitting there. So your question's a good one, because there were times where they popped up, like that fire base between Dragon Mountain and Campanari. They hit that one, and it was one evening. They came through the South Vietnamese section of that base and got into our base, and with charges, disabled 85% of the artillery we had there, blew up 85% of the bunkers. We were shooting them running around inside the compound. I mentioned Ben Head. Within minutes of them starting the attack, there were people running around with satchel charges inside the base. They'd tunneled underneath the barbed wire. We didn't know they were even there or done that. And all of a sudden they're just there. And you got to fight. So, I'd heard soldiers from World War II talk about hurry up and wait. And you don't know when they're going to start a fight. You don't know when the fight's going to end. You don't know. In Vietnam, there was no front line. Leastwise in World War II, if they came through like the Battle of the Bulge, when they started it, you knew they were there. You knew they were moving troops to fight it. Vietnam, you were fighting with what you had for the most part. I mean, you might bring in Puff the Magic Dragon, and you might bring in an aerial gunship, call her Camp Holloway and get some of our helicopter gunships to come shoot it up if things are getting bad. There were some rapid reaction units we had, but most of them were for the field. You get hit and you're a convoy. You're fighting your way out of the mess. And normally they wouldn't stay there long enough for you to bring in reinforcements or do anything. So my take on, was it more dangerous to go into Cambodia? I don't think so. I think we somewhat caught them off guard. I don't think they were prepared or thinking over there offensively, and I don't think their bases were really set up that offensive. The people we put over the border prior to that were all small patrols for the most part, LRP patrols, long-range recon patrols. There were not a lot of men. When they encountered a lot of enemy, they used artillery, they used airstrikes, they used whatever. They didn't try and engage them themselves. They just ghosted away into the jungle.
Now, would you go in and get those people? Or would they just get themselves out?
Yeah. And there were times we went in and got them when they were in contact. And a couple times we did what we call a string job. They couldn't get to an open LZ, landing zone. Found a hole in the jungle, dropped a 160-foot rope and hoped it reached the ground. They had like a jumpsuit, carabine around the back, they'd hook in. The most we could pull with a Huey out was 3. It depends. If they weren't too high in the mountains and the air wasn't too hot that day, we could maybe take 4 and bring them straight up out of there and then fly them someplace to where we could get to an LZ. And maybe you want to skip the first one. They might be figuring you might land there. Go to the second one and set them down, then get them in the aircraft. A couple times close to there, we'd seen guys come all the way back to that staging field by Dak To. But most of those guys we were picking up over the border were mercenaries, CIA, full-time CIA, or they were, like I said, mercenaries, which might be made up of a little bit of everything. Korean, Australian, Americans, but not soldiers.
Okay. And then would they also use some of the Vietnamese, like Hmong Chinese or Montagnards or?
Yep. Some units were Vietnamese. Some of them functioned with Vietnamese over there. It depended on what they were doing. I mean, if you were going to take a prisoner, it was nice if you could talk to them. But for the most part, LRP patrols didn't take prisoners. What are you going to do with them? And you don't have that much firepower to begin with. And if you got a guy or two watching a prisoner, he's a guy or two that can't shoot. And everybody's got to be able to